Hi everyone, my name's David Pike, otherwise known as the Connector Geek. Welcome to the latest of our Ask the Expert videos. I'm joined today by Lily Chang from Molex, and we're going to talk about antennas. Lily, it's been great to have you here.
Thank you, Dave. Nice to talk to you again.
No problem at all. So we're going to talk about antennas, and I suppose the most important question is, why are antennas so important to modern technology?
Well, if you look at even our day-to-day life now and future, right, everything is about communication over, wireless into different networks to simplify our lifestyle. And antenna is a very important element in wireless communication. It is the element that radiates. We usually call it the radio, to send signals from one device, one location to another wirelessly. So, without antennas, there is no wireless. That's the reason why antenna is getting more and more visibility, not only by, applications, also by a lot of companies as they need to start putting in wireless communication into their devices.
And you talked a little bit about making our everyday lives easier. I'm guessing we're talking about antennas, though, not just in domestic or consumer. We're talking about almost every aspect, whether it's industrial or automotive. Everywhere's going to need these things, isn't it?
That's exactly it, right? So when we talk about wireless, typically in the wireless world, it all boils down to what kind of protocols are we trying to use for our communication. So a very typical one is our Wi-Fi. So that is in our house, we use it to communicate within an environment, but in industry, it's being used heavily to communicate data from machines to machines. And also, even for machines from one location to another, it's being cellular networks are being used to this kind of communication. So not only, the typical things that we use at home, like, Bluetooth to connect our headphones or audio or cellular to make our phone calls. These protocols are now integrating into industries.
Well, we've talked a little bit with some of your colleagues from Molex before about the smart factory, about the future of industry and the Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things is, as you said, is machines communicating with the machines. So if we talk about the smart factory, what kind of things might we see in a smart factory?
Yeah, so one thing I would like to share with everybody is, like, smart factory need not be super complicated. Smart factory can be as simple as implementing RFIC to track your assets, so that you do not need to have a person going around checking what you have, how old they are. All this information can be stored into an RFIC, and you can just read it and scan it off your machine, to the very complex ones where you have sensors installed in the machinery that is able to communicate critical data like machine health, cycle time, back into the system for data analysis, for the company to make optimizing decisions, like when should we service this machine, how should we schedule servicing this machine's optimizing output. So it can range from the very simple steps you take to slowly build up your smart factory to pretty complex ones where, they could automatically run by itself almost without any human intervention.
And that's actually an important thing that we wanted to make sure that we stated, that smart factory, this idea of the smart factory is a huge concept. Every single aspect of the factory communicating with each other. Mm-hmm. And for people who are installing this kind of technology, it can be scary to think that they've got to get rid of all of their existing equipment or their existing infrastructure and replace it with brand new. But that's not the case, is it? This is easy to implement.
Right, right, and that's why Molex has a very big portfolio of standard antennas, where anybody who's interested to start incorporating intelligence for wireless communication can look through it and then try to select whatever antennas that work best. We do have antenna field application support, where we have technical engineers mending these questions and providing feedback and guidance to our customers. So that's exactly it. You do not have to discard what you have. You could slowly retrofit what you have that is retrofittable by implementing antennas into your modems and start building up your smart factory. And also one thing, a smart factory is not limited to in a factory. Actually, it actually branches out to from the factory to maybe a material handling vehicle that is out, and feeding information to it, or it sending information back to the system in order for all the planning and all the data analysis that's needed.
And that's interesting, because I guess that's where we're going to see the blending of, let's say, a Wi-Fi network within a building and then maybe a cellular network outside the building. Mm-hmm. And yet they've all got to share information with each other.
That's right. So the coexistence of antenna in a device is getting a momentum. So, way back when, all we need on a phone is, a cellular in order for us to get signal and be able to communicate. But we are seeing this need because of all the intelligence or internet growth, that we need to start incorporating multiple antennas into a limited space. So, that becomes tricky for some of our customers, and that's when Molex was able to help support this integration process.
That's another interesting point, isn't it? Because you mentioned that it starts to get tricky when you're integrating different antennas into pieces of equipment. So, I guess the first question is, every different band, every different frequency, every different protocol is going to need a different antenna, isn't it?
Somewhat true. So antennas are not only guided by regulatory frequency bands. So sometimes if the antenna and these frequency bands sometimes overlap for these protocols. So if we have like an antenna, maybe that we can use in cellular that overlaps the Wi-Fi band or any other bands, you can actually use the same antenna for that specific community. That means it has a dual function. But the problem with that is that you need to have a modem that is able to process and be aware of what kind of information it's trying to communicate. So our recommendation typically is to have different antennas for different protocols, because that would simplify the electronics that you will need in your device. But some customers do, like to have a more complex electronics on their device, and then they have the freedom to use one antenna for a couple of protocols.
But I guess even for those customers who are going to use different antennas for different bands and the same piece of equipment, you mentioned when we were planning for this call that engineers have to be aware of how these antennae will affect each other. So what kind of challenges do the engineers face when they're trying to design with these antennae?
Yeah, that's a very great point to bring up and remind our listeners is that, antenna placement is key, because you need, if, the assumption or what we face all the time or request from our customers is we do not have the whole device space to locate our antennas. So we always have to put them somewhat close together And an important thing is, we need to have adequate separation between the antennas so that they would not interfere with one another. And the other point too is that some antennas have to be placed in a certain way for maximum, performance. For example, like when you have a GPS antenna in the device, it definitely has to be placed, where it's radiating in a maximum form. So all these considerations, the engineers will need to think about it, where we can place it. Is there enough space to put it on the device physical form factor, or is there totally no room? Then we got to make use of, the PCB on the electronics board as our location for the antenna. So when you put components on a PCB, you start to need to be aware of the other components around it, the ground plane of the PCB that might impact the performance of the antenna, and then how far is the antenna away from the ground plane on the PCB. So there are details that you will need to be very careful and look into it. Otherwise, your antenna will not be performing well. Even though you think that you have incorporated, like a Wi-Fi antenna on your PCB, but actually because of a non-optimum location, it's just not radiating enough to be able to send signal out properly.
In that situation, are there going to be applications that require the antenna to be mounted outside the device, or can everything be done internally?
That's a great question. Yes, there will be scenarios where you will need to mount antennas outside the device, and most of the time is when your device has a metal enclosure. There's no way you can put an antenna inside a metal box and hope that it radiates outside the box. So in these scenarios, that's in the RF perspective, you will need to place the antenna outside your device. But when it comes to mechanical and environmental kind of consideration, sometimes, antennas, due to the function of the device, just has to be placed on the outside. So there are, two considerations, the RF kind of limitations. You cannot put anything inside a metal box and mean an antenna and hope that it radiates. And the other thing is just functionally, sometimes we just got to place it outside.
And the minute we place devices outside, or we place the antenna outside the device, as you said, we're up against the environmental concerns where we need IP sealing, we need to be able to resist wind and rain and weather. And so, moving towards the kind of solutions that Molex has, I'm guessing you have that range, that alternative between internal and external antenna within the options.
Yes, we do, Dave. So what we typically do is we would design an antenna with the intended application, internal or exterior, in mind. And then we would first ensure that the RF performance meets the required kind of gain and radiation pattern that is needed. We will also send the antenna through the applicable environmental and mechanical stresses that the antenna would see. For example, if we have an antenna that has to go outside, typically what we would test for is, per your comment just now, water ingress kind of robustness. Also, its ability to stand UV kind of aging, and then thermal shock, depending on the type of antenna, it's, from minus 40 degrees C to 105 degrees C or 85 degrees C. So it all depends on the application of this antenna. And we have application specs that would kind of provide guidelines on how you should apply or set up the antenna on your device. And then we also do have a product specs that would show you the performance of this antenna simulated in a free space environment, for you to at least have an idea, if I put this antenna in a location with no metal obstruction, how will it perform? And a lot of times we do also work with our customer to truly either test or simulate antennas in the real world application, where we would kind of then look at how the components around it has affected its original free space performance.
And that's actually brought up something that I'm always very interested in, is environment. And I think it's probably worth that we remind listeners at the moment, the external environment, we think about wind and rain and weather, but things like UV radiation that Lily's just touched upon, UV radiation can have serious effects on things like plastics. Plastics can degrade very quickly when exposed to sunlight, direct sunlight. So these are the things that have to be borne in mind.
Right. It's a chain reaction, right? What we test UV for is its impact and its degradation impact on, for example, the rubber sealing for water ingress. So a lot of the tests that we do, some people might look at it and say, why are you doing this? If this is just, a PCB and things like that. But we are looking at the complete picture. What are the chain effects if something fails? So that's why being a connector company gave us a good foundation to understand what are the important factors to consider on the environmental and the mechanical aspects when it comes to electronics.
That then leads us on actually to a very interesting point for our listeners, because many people will know Molex specifically as a connector manufacturer, so making plugs and sockets. And here we're talking to Molex as one of the world's largest, as I understand, manufacturers of antenna. So my question really is, what benefits, we've just talked about one, you guys know about connectors. What other benefits does Molex bring to the antenna world from their experience with making connectors?
That's a very good question in the sense that actually part of the antenna do have connectors on it. The connector at the end of the cable that connects it to the PCB. So actually, without knowing, Molex has already started to try to understand the application of the antenna, even while we were developing connectors many, many, many years ago. So that gave us a lot of knowledge and a lot of knowledge about mechanical and reliability requirements for antenna use case based on what we learned about connectors that was used for antenna in the past with our customers. It also gave us close insight into the requirements of a lot of industries like, automotive, medical, consumer products as to what kind of environmental and mechanical requirements are required for these devices. And then we can then, extrapolate these requirements into antenna, tailoring it in the antenna kind of perspective. So working with Molex as an antenna partner, we not only know, antennas, what will impact the performance, we will also know what would impact, the conduit of, current going into the antennas, what affects that portion of the antenna. So it's a comprehensive kind of understanding for the antenna system.
I think that's one of the fantastic things about working with Molex when it comes to this type of technology. Molex has that experience of all of these different industries and of these different environments. And antenna is still, when it comes down to it, a tool for connectivity. So if we look at Molex providing connectivity solutions, the antenna is a growing importance when it comes to that connectivity solution.
Exactly.
We've talked about one of the products that Molex has released fairly recently and is growing in popularity, especially in these environments where we've got to bridge the gap between the Wi-Fi world and then the 5G, the cellular world, and then the GPS world. So we've talked about there's a multi-way antenna product that Molex has released. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what it's going to do for customers?
Sure, Dave. So what we the name of this antenna for us, it's kind of like a multi-in-one hub kind of antenna where we incorporate what we discovered as the critical antennas or wireless functions that's needed by the industry that could help our customer create wireless communication on any equipment or any devices that they may want. So it's essentially a box with 5 different types of antennas in this box. And what our user or the customer needs to do is just mount the box in a way, in a location that works best for them and that meets the application specs. As I've mentioned earlier, we have done through a very intensive study about, where and how to locate antennas so that we can maximize its output. So our customers would just have to locate the antenna at where they can meet the application requirement and it's convenient or safe for them, and just plug into their modem board, and there we go. We have a wireless system going for them. So Molex actually spent a couple of years working on these boxes because of the fact that, it's not easy to put many different antennas into a limited space. Of course, it is easy if we have like the size of a closet to put it, but we are trying to minimize the size, the XY dimension, and the thickness because we are seeing the trend of needing a more compact multi-in-one hubs. So we did a lot of study to ensure that these different protocol antennas can coexist without interference. And then we also developed a design where we are able to allow these antennas to be placed right onto metal. This is very important, Dave, to emphasize is, as a lot of antenna engineers know, once you place an antenna on metal, that's it. It's gone. So our RF engineers worked, a long time in a lot of studies and development, and we are able to design antennas or have a design that will allow our antenna box to be placed onto any type of enclosure material. So, so we do have a series of antennas that we have that we call a multi-hub antenna series that will be available for our customers to select from, depending on how many types of antennas they need. We have 3-in-1 in a hub, or we have 5-in-1, and then we are going to launch our 7-in-1 pretty soon. So these antennas not only have different number of antennas on it, we also do have different mounting styles because, in some industry, we need the cable to come out from the side of the box. And in some industry, it's it's a safer thing to do to have cables coming up from the bottom. So we do have different mounting styles, and we do have different number of antennas in this multi-in-one hubs.
So this could be as simple as someone with a 40-foot shipping container that's going to be taken around the world. They could use one of these devices mounted to the outside of the antenna, mounted to the outside of the container. As long as it's powered, we have the ability to track the location with GPS. We can communicate via the 5G wireless network, and the antenna can track the position of that container wherever it happens to go.
Right. I forgot to mention, the different types of antenna in these hubs. You hit it. You hit the nail on the head. We do have cellular antennas included in there. actually we have, depending on which number of antenna boxes that you need, we do have, two cellular antennas up to 4, because we are incorporating 5G in our boxes. And then we have Wi-Fi antennas that allow data, sending within close distance. And we also have GPS for location tracking. So a very big application that we are seeing from our current existing customers is putting them on material handling devices, putting them in warehouse robots that would go around the warehouse and identifying, packages where they could extract, and also a lot of what do you call that? Devices out that would help us, like lawnmowers or anything like that. So that's right. It has cellular, Wi-Fi, GPS. These are the 3 main protocols that these boxes do provide in terms of the wireless communication.
And then, of course, leaning back to the traditional business of Molex, the cables that connect this multi-way box are all fully connected with Molex connectors. So that end of the signal is also being handled perfectly for the physical connections.
Exactly. And, our boxes, we can actually do slight customizations in terms of the type of connectors that you may need. There are many different types of RF connectors. Some people need, SMAs. Some people need micro coax kind of connectors. But we do have a level of customization where we could provide the antenna box with the kind of termination that you will need. And then also customizing the length that you need, because it all depends, cable length. It all depends on where you want to mount your device. It's not like a one length fits all. We understand that there need to be some level of flexibility and customization in these boxes. And Molex do offer this kind of support.
Fantastic. I actually think that that's a brilliant place to wrap up our conversation. As I've said before, Molex is well known for being a solution provider in the connector space. There's plenty of connectors, and RS has been a long-time partner of Molex, supplying lots of different kinds of connectors from within the Molex portfolio. The fact that Molex is also one of the world's largest antenna manufacturers actually brings together 2 technologies that on the surface don't appear to be related. But every antenna needs to be connected. Every antenna needs to be integrated into an existing piece of electronics. And when it comes to providing that level of connectivity, who better than a major connector manufacturer to come up with these technologies? RS, as I mentioned, is a large partner for Molex, and a lot of these products are available on the RS website, including the multi-way hub that we've just talked about. But there's also the board mount, the cable mount, the interior mount antenna that we've discussed. So when it comes to using RS as a development partner, coming up with the products that you need to design your latest product, a lot of these Molex antennas are available from RS in all sorts of configurations to make it easy for you to integrate that into your design. And of course, all of the information that you need in terms of data sheets are available through RS as well. So Lily, thank you so much for sharing this information with us. The world of antennas as a connector guy, antenna is still a bit of a closed book to me. So I'm learning an awful lot of new things when it comes to how this technology is implemented into design. So thank you so much for spending your time with us.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much.